Hello everyone and welcome back to Talking Points with KPI, episode number 36. Today is another blog style podcast. Today we'll be going over Justin's 2-year pitching review. So now guys, I'll open it for discussion. You guys have been wanting to do these reviews like we've talked about before and previous with the hitting and pitching. Justin or Eric, if you want to go first, how has just being able to get this data in for this massive review helped you guys?
I know Jay's going to go into the specifics of it. Maybe I can kind of provide context and like the big picture is just, this is a shift in what we've done over the last, basically since we've moved in here, is that we're going to collect all data and then we're not going to rely on other people for data. We used to rely on other facilities for data. And we realized quickly that, hey, we have the capacity to do this on our own and we have a unique population here that no one else has. And so we started to really dig in and dive in on that and start collecting all the data. And Justin's had the capacity and the intelligence to kind of really get into this the last few months as we've had a little extra time on our hands and really kind of produce something really great. But this all started, years ago. The 2-year player review that he did spanned even before KPI started. Yeah. When we were in our old facility, before we had the KPI name and we were doing, some elementary things to what we're doing now, but Dan and I were just starting somewhere basically. Yeah. And collecting this data. And Dan will talk about the training side and some of the ages the kids started training, but basically this group of kids that we kind of pulled out to study and look for trends is a really special group of kids because they have been pretty much training full-time for 2 years. That's why we use them. They're the only ones that have been with it that long. And two, the achievements of this particular group is pretty high level, considering and kind of what we're talking about is because of their training.
Yeah.
Ultimately, too, it sparked a conversation between me and Eric to where it was the 2 years themselves that they trained under were completely different, right? They experienced the COVID year and then they had to transition into a new director of pitching and experience a new wave of stuff. And so it kind of sparked the interest of can we look and see what those changes were, or were there any changes at all? Mm-hmm. And so it sparked an interesting kind of viewpoint to look back at 2 years worth of training.
Yeah, I think the part that I want to speak to probably the most outside of the training stuff is, this is a small number of players relative to the number of athletes who've come through our doors. And the reason it's a small number is some of the talent requirements, obviously the training consistency, and then I think that it's a trust piece. Mm-hmm. For a family to entrust their 6th, 7th, 8th grader upwards to maybe 9th or a 10th grader to, okay, hey, I'm going to put my kid in your systems. They're not perfect. Some of the stuff and some of the training we did up to this point was purely just strength and conditioning and prehab, and then just managing workload on the field, mm-hmm. To the point where, boom, we got Rapsodo, boom, we got hit tracks, boom, we got all these tools to evaluate and track what we're doing, and then to be able to have the capacity and have somebody come on staff to then look at all of this information and say, okay, what really happened here? We knew this group was progressing. We knew that they were going to be talented, and there are things that we could see on the field and in the facility. So I wanted to just provide context on this. Some of these athletes have been, whether it's on the team side with some of the partnerships we have there, mm-hmm. or with the training side, they've been training for 3, 4, 5 years straight now. Yeah. But we chose a 2-year window where they were extremely consistent. And one of the positives of a COVID component was there was no distractions. There was nothing else going on. Then these families went all in on development, and they reaped the rewards. They made us look very, very good. Yeah. And obviously we'll speak to some of the data. So
yeah, and so you talk about the group. So you have a lot of athletes in this building, and out of the 85 pitchers that we have currently pitching in the facility, the group was done in a group of 12. So talk about how, whether that was a number that you had thought about before, as soon as you started this, or contextually it just worked out to the number being even, whether it may be. Talk about how these 12 members have been either chosen or just had the data worked.
Well, it started, I guess, with more looking at the growth in the total number of pitchers we've had. Mm-hmm. Right? I think we look back to the first summer of 2020, there was something 30, not even 40 pitchers. And then that next summer we had almost 100 total, including college. And so just that inevitable growth in a year kind of sparked this idea. And then just looking back at 2020 and diving into the Rapsodo and the tech, I decided to choose 15 athletes that had a consistent summer of 2020 because that was probably the longest stretch, like Dan mentioned, of consistency that they had. And then had to remove a couple athletes because they had to go to college and we missed that time of consistency. And it kind of trickled down to this number of 12.
And I want to jump in there. Justin I want to give him kudos. He went further back from his employment here to get this data. So it wasn't just like, hey, I've been here and now I'm gonna look at, like, he went back before he was hired. So this is a very thorough review, and he went pretty deep on this.
Yeah, so if you think about it from just a scientific study, which this is not a study, I think this is more of a review is probably the right term. You typically need somewhere in that 10 to 20. Like, you're not going to do a study on one kid or 5. And I think the part I really like about this population is it is overarching. 5th, 6th, 7th grader up to 10th, 11th. We didn't have any 12th graders, but we have this large span of time of where, like, that's where development should be your main focus. And I think that's what helps us speak to, okay, like, our systems help athletes of all backgrounds, all talent level. And some of these athletes, when they started off, we knew they were going to be talented. Some of these athletes, we didn't know they were going to be talented, but they all worked their tails off, and were able to see consistent progress in the metrics that we care for.
Yeah. So Justin, now I want you to go into a little bit about these metrics. You started, obviously, as we know, it's a 2-year review. It's now 2022, so obviously this would have started in 2020. You have them in the summer on a ramp up. How do you see that go well? And then just talk about the trend that you saw up until now.
Yeah, there was like 2 trends in a way, right? So the on-ramp that happened in summer lasted a longer period because travel ball hadn't started yet.
Yes.
And I don't think travel ball even started until the winter of 21. So they had like 6 or 7 months worth of training time that they weren't playing. And so we ultimately got to look at the velo, and they got to get after it on the velo. So I wanted to see, like, okay, what were the initial gains that happened? And then it led to, okay, like, what's the trend they went through when they were shut down in the winter before they went back into travel ball, right? What did that trend look like when they ramped back up for high school season mid-March? Because with the COVID season, I think started like end of March, beginning of April.
It was late March.
So it started with this idea of, like, what does, like, the 12-month season look like? And you can even see, like, the velocity trend graph shows, like, okay, like, going into April, they're peaking, and then coming into summer, they had to kind of dip a little bit due to a deload or a shutdown or just a maintenance phase, and then they peak again going into fall. And so, like, seeing that play out, I thought was super interesting.
Absolutely. And so, Dan, I'll throw it to you on the strength side. Not only being consistent with Justin's pitching and working with his systems, how did you see the athletes kind of take initiative in their strength stuff during these 2 years?
I think making it very clear to them that the most important piece is the strength and conditioning side of things. When you are 10 to 14 years old or 15, 16 years old, puberty is going to be the strongest performing enhancing drug that is going to hit the system, right? And I think an old dogma used to be, like, wait for that to happen. Yeah. Like, grow into, fill in the blank. Grow into your body, grow into your velocity, grow into these things. And I think that the mentality should shift to, no, we need to capitalize, build the foundation so that when it does hit, I like using the car analogy a lot, we just put NOS into the system. So, like, let's make a really good car. And then once it gets supercharged, then we can exponential gains. And I think that the cool part of this being a 2-year review is it's not just grabbing this one small population. Okay, probably it was a puberty effect, which definitely is the case for some of these kids. But there are older athletes in this study that still made the same amount of progress, and I did want to speak to that. So from a strength and conditioning side, I think our biggest and my biggest points to the families was individualization. And it enabled us to meet the needs of a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old, and making sure that, number one, doing everything we can to make sure they're safe, and then progressing them appropriately. I think one of the problems on the youth sides is kids shouldn't lift weights. It's like when that kid's pitching and swinging and sprinting on the bases, the stress that their joints are going to see are exponentially higher than what they see in this facility. So we need to prepare them for that. We need to improve their movement capacity. Kids don't move. They literally sit at the desk all day. They go home, and they watch TV, and they play video games all day. So it's like we need to get them moving. We need to get them doing something. So that was a huge focus, was just improving movement capacity, improving just general strength. We didn't have some of the tools we have now during this time frame. And I'm going to be writing probably a blog post and doing this. Like, we have revamped and redid all of our S&C, and we still got really good results with the old strength and conditioning programs. So,
and I want to jump in on that because Justin didn't quite highlight this in the blog, but it is something that we know about this group is they've been incredibly healthy. So a lot of times when we're training velocity and we're doing high intensity strength training, people think that we're only going after the velocity numbers, and that's actually not the case. Like, we're actually going after health too. So this group's a really good example that there were no major injuries, barring flare up, shut down for a couple weeks kind of a thing, which is unavoidable. this group, because of the consistency of their training, stayed very healthy, and it showed in the review.
And on top of that, like Dan hit it on the nail of like when we're talking about like switching training focuses and going from a maintenance phase into a shutdown phase and things like that, like we're still attacking mechanical deficiencies. Yes. Even if we're not throwing or we're literally not hopping on the mound, like we're getting after it in the weight room that's inevitably enhancing movement qualities that leads to just more efficiency and leads to guys staying healthier, right? So
I know we'll probably hit on this again, is if you compare this group to the average kid, what goes through the average player development system that's been built out for them, number one, with this time frame, it was taken away. Mm-hmm. Development, the belief up until this point is playing. You did play to develop and vice versa. And there's kids that, because that opportunity was gone, they didn't get that. I think very, very common is my kid's young, they need more attention, they need to get lessons, they need one-on-one, they need all these things, and it just also happens to be your coach who writes the lineup for your travel ball team, who does your lessons too. That we've proven with this group and with all the athletes through this door, the small group semi-private setting is just as good, if not, we can make an argument that better, because we can prove the results. Yep. The kids enjoy it. You're not going to get a 12, 13, 14-year-old to do something 2 times a week, 3 times a week for 2 years
Especially
straight.
The same thing.
Yeah, like maybe video games
yeah.
or baseball. Yeah. Like you're not going to get them to do strength and conditioning, arm care, throwing protocols, all that stuff for an extensive period of time if it isn't something that they enjoy and they see the benefits from. So I think that's I'm sure we'll hit on that a couple more times.
Coming back to that, like you asked earlier, like how did we choose this group?
Yeah.
In reality, the group of 12, majority of them grew up together. Yeah. A lot of them are local guys. A lot of them during that COVID kind of became a unit, and it was like some social being of like, we're going to get after it together, whereas you don't really get that in the individual lesson standpoint. So I think that's like a huge component of this review too as well.
Yeah, because if you speak to, like, we had the like quote unquote upperclassmen who were still like freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, and then you had your 8th, 9th graders, and then you had your 5th, 6th, 7th graders, and you have these nice layers of like, I want to be like him. Yeah. I want to be like him. I want to be like him.
They have mentors.
And exactly, I think that was really, really cool.
I say it all the time. I feel like this place is like a college team or something. Like you're going to get a guy for 4 or 5 years. Like there's a culture that gets created from top down, and I guess this would be like that first wave of culture we're creating.
For sure, and what you see with this is, a lot of people would think, oh, there's just a good group of kids coming through this area right now.
We got lucky.
Like this is natural, But here's the facts. You could take Morgan Hill, Gilroy, and Hollister and look at the amount of Division I pitchers that have come out of this area ever, and count those under 10. Yeah. And now between all the high schools in those three cities, you're looking at well over 10 Division I commits right now. So we talk about we don't want to be lucky. We don't want to be the outliers. We don't want to be the norm. And this is the norm now, and the expectation on how arms should be developed in this area.
Absolutely. And so I'm gonna jump back just a little bit. So Eric, I'll mention this to you. So a lot of kids nowadays, they want to see instant gratification, and that's why you see the one-on-ones kind of have that success because, oh, great job. It's like giving a dog a treat. Like, oh, here's a treat, nice job. Go ahead, we'll do this tomorrow, and you can work on that next time. How have you seen these kids over a 2-year span? That's a long time for them to keep training, keep going, see the consistency, and now for them to see where they got today. How have you seen them not only grown as baseball players, but like mature as human beings in this facility?
Well, it's just so much, and there's a ton of studies out there about child development, stuff like that. When you do things early on in puberty, it stays with you the rest of your life. Yeah. So we've created a culture and habits of like, hey, like if you want to make it here, if you want to be this person, and some of the guys on this list are big time guys that are well known, and the other kids in here see that like, hey, they started here. They moved, they worked the board off and did this here. So it's just really like this reciprocal kind of vibe and culture that we've created in here where everyone understands, like, if I want to get to that, I need to do this all the time. And like Dan said earlier, like that's really hard to do in a training environment with this age of a population. College and professional players are highly motivated to get after it because they want to be higher level college and professional players. You don't always see that in middle school and high school kids. And for us to have, well over 200 high school age athletes coming in here and training multiple times per week, it truly is a testament to like, one, like obviously our systems are great, but two, the culture that is in here and then the enjoyment the athletes have in here, I think is really lasting.
I think that retention piece is huge. I think a large component of it is the athlete and their age. It's not the most important thing in the world to them. Other things are going on. I think more times than not, though, typically when I sit down with assessments, people have already tried other ways.
Yes.
I go to lessons. I go to a personal trainer. I go to a speed coach. I go to all these people. I go to my travel coach, whatever it may be, and they don't feel like they're getting the results that they want based on the time, energy, and money they're allocating to it. Justin talked about training. We were talking earlier, training economy. Like, we only have so much of those resources. And I think, obviously, with our systems doing what they did, and then being able to validate with the technology to show, like, hey, yeah, kids are getting better. Yeah. I think that's what started building this culture and trust of, like, I'm not going to go stray and go to my lesson coach or go to this person or try and get that quick fix. It is a long process, and we were lucky. I do think we were lucky to have that trust from the parents and the players for such an extended period of time. But I do think we earned that trust.
Yeah, and I want to jump on that point too. Like, we have the capacity to do this.
Yeah.
You know, like, we have the technology to do this. We have the staff to do this in here. Yes. And this is why you don't see this happen very often. Like, who in Northern California has ever done a review on 2 years worth of pitching in a group? You know, like, that hasn't happened. No. So the reason why it hasn't happened is because it's hard to do. Like, it's hard to truly track data for that long and make a review and have the resources to do so. So, you know, we have some unique capabilities in here to do this. And then now what we do with this is we use it for programming. We use it for coaches training. Yep. Like Justin's building out systems right now based on this information that are going to help the next wave of athletes that come through the doors of this building. Yeah. And you just can't get that in a lesson environment. You know, like, you're going to get a coach sitting on a bucket flipping and saying, good job, but you're not going to get this. You can't get that in a team environment. And we know our players have to play on teams. We're not saying teams are bad. We're not saying that at all. What we are saying is that, one, we can give you objectifiable ways on how you're going to get better in here, and we can show our work results and prove it with stuff like this. Yeah,
it's something that's ever flowing. Like, from 2020 to 21, we had a complete shift in who was running the pitching program, and yet we still got results. Yeah. And I think it bases around the fact that you're not reliant upon the one individual that's programming you or deciding what goes on. Inevitably, the player and the athlete is at the center of that, and that it creates a buy-in from them to make this work. Absolutely. And that we're here to kind of set those guide rails a little bit and kind of pat them on the butt and keep that going. But having somebody just solely responsible for it can create this bottleneck effect, and something that we're trying to create internally, systems that allow for coaches to coach any athlete and have a plan in place that they can coach.
Well, also in any system, I may say that you have coaches that can work in multiple systems, which is, you don't see that in many places at all. And now I'm going to boast a little bit about the review and about the athletes a little bit. So, Justin, I want you to go into, and if you haven't seen it already, go look at Justin's pitching review in the winter, because he tied it into the 2-year review, which makes sense, obviously. Talk about how you saw that 4 mile an hour increase in that span, and also, we talked about it before, the no injury or hindrance piece, and how these kids are being healthy while gaining that much velocity.
Yeah, I mean, for the winter review, having the force plates was a huge addition to that, right? Like, being able to tell when an athlete was fatigued and being able to monitor and back off on workloads when needed was huge. But I think something to highlight, like, that 4.5 mile an hour increase by year was, like, the first year, 2020, Dan mentioned training allocation or training cost, is they had a lot of time. And they were younger, right? So they were able to kind of increase their velo at a much higher rate, which can be bad, but leading into 2021, you know, they started playing a little bit more, the training costs kind of go down, and they start to get older, that increase in velo becomes harder. And so, like, I wanted to do this review to kind of get an understanding of, like, when an athlete does get to their junior or senior year, like, what does that velo progression look like? Like, at what point does it plateau, right? Or, like, what are the things we're going to focus on next when it comes to that? And so I thought it was just interesting to see, like, yes, there was an 8 mile an hour increase in 2 years, but most of that came in that first year when there was a lot of time allocated to it.
I think the timeline is important. Obviously, we touched on COVID, but I think this encompassed a fall, a winter, a spring, travel season, high school season. Like, it's encompassing a lot of playing. And from an injury standpoint, I think a lot of times what we see is that transactional mentality. I want 6 weeks, instant velo gains, or I want it over 8 weeks, and I want this and I want that. It's like, well, this is 12 months, and we're working on internally talking about, like, how can we, you know, create an even stronger environment where, like, no, you're buying into this for a year round. We're not going to just send you off to your high school season and say good luck.
Well, it also comes from the false promises that we don't give. We don't tell you, and you say this all the time in your assessments, we don't guarantee success. We will guarantee that you're going to work hard to get a better percentage at success, but we're not guaranteeing success.
Yeah, so I think that, again, this is so unique because it's not just 6 week winter program, increase your thermal velocity, or here's an 8 week, it is, okay, this is 24 months of time and looking at the ebb and flow and using obviously velocity as the perspective because that's majority of what clients want to see. But I think that injury piece, you know, there were things we had to navigate, and I think that we could say that kids overall stayed way healthier compared to the average population, which is a 50% injury rate. For sure. But don't get me wrong, there were times we had to shut kids down, and there were times we had to tell families that tournament's not worth it, or we're pulling you out of this game because you at 13 years old, like that tournament does not matter at all. Like there's times where we've had to, you know, go to battle against high school coaches and travel coaches saying like, this is not in your child's best interest, and we as KPI, this outside unbiased sourced, only cares about your kid, putting them at the center of everything we do. I do want to highlight that. So I think this thing is extremely unique, and I encourage every parent to read this because it's going to provide a ton of insights to a new way of player development.
And it really nods towards, you know, what is theoretically our business model, which is it's based on retention, not conversion. So like we easily have enough data and results to market heavily on velocity gains, right? And if, you know, we could sell the 6-week velo program and get them to pay a lot of money up front, but that's not what we base this on. We haven't based this on turning over clients and then tricking them and then getting them out of here and then tricking the next wave of clients. We've based this whole thing on, we're going to bet on ourselves that you're going to bet on yourself and you're going to stay here for a long time and get better. Absolutely. And so it's unique because the easy sell is the 6-week velocity program. The hard sell is like, hey, like you got to grind this out for a couple years and you're going to get better.
Yeah. Well, then the other is making it more of a granular. Hey, I need to fix my mechanics. I fly open, or I do this, or I do that. And it's like, okay, we'll go to the lesson, and I'll fix you right now. Yeah. And then you go back to games, and you fall back to old habits. Yeah, here's I use that a lot in assessments. Yeah. Whereas, like, no, these are going to be long-term changes, and there's no guarantee that they show up on the field. Mm-hmm. Luckily for this group, they did. Yeah. And it's becoming more and more clear with how much success our athletes are having at the high school level and at the travel ball level. It just takes time. I think we're having conversations with families right now where it's like, it's just not instant gratification. It's not going to happen in 1 month. It's not going to happen in one season. There has to be a level of buy-in. The part that's cool with this group is there was somewhat of a leap of faith. Yeah. We hadn't Erick had proved himself, and I had a little bit of credibility on the strength and conditioning side. But as we built out these systems, there was a leap of faith, and we do everything we can to make sure that is in good faith. Like we're doing everything we can. We're creating as much accountability for our staff and ourselves that what we're doing is helping your kid get better.
So last question from me. So what's next, Justin? What is your plan for the future? Whether it be a 6-year review or whatever you think, what would be next for you?
Or programming based off this, stuff like that.
Yeah. I think, two things that have kind of been touched on in this, and Erick kind of highlighted both of them. The first being like getting a full understanding of like what it looks like pre-puberty, or what like what the body actually does going through these changes of puberty, and then what can we do from a training standpoint to mitigate injury risk in that process, and then post-puberty, like what are the areas that we can attack the most that enhance movement efficiency and movement capacity, and inevitably like keep guys healthy at the same time. And I think like kind of an 8-year review would be interesting. Like we have a bunch of guys that have left to go to college in the last year. And continually retaining those guys is going to help us better understand like what needs to happen to get those guys, to the pro level or whatever it may be. And then the second one kind of being like the internal coaching system, or just internally learning the processes that inevitably help these athletes get better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the one part I'm looking forward to is just the level of individualization that we've been able to do within this time frame and then leading up to date. I think it's gonna get exponential. It's gonna get to the point that our programming, we can meet the needs of so many athletes, and it's because we have a phenomenal staff. Like you said earlier, like if one coach is the core to you getting better, it's a massive bottleneck on your development. And so I think that the individualization that we're going to be able to bring to the table in the next 2, 3, 4 years, and then also meet new needs. I think you speaking to the college athlete, like we've only had maybe 1 to 2 classes worth of kids that have gone off to college and then came back. And then, okay, how do we meet their needs? How do we deal with the workloads that they deal at the college level and just the college experience? And then the next one would be the professional experience. Yep. So I think we're very excited with where this is heading.
And in the short term, we're going to do something similar next week with the hitting. So Chase, our director of hitting, compiled all kinds of trends and numbers, and what I'm doing today and tomorrow, or yesterday and today, is pulling those numbers out basically and kind of making it into a written form. So we'll have a similar kind of a trend look next week at some of the similar things that we've noticed with hitters. So
I got one more thing, because I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. this program leading up to these kids going into the 2-year review, that has evolved into our youth development program.
Yeah.
It used to be exclusive to the teams that we were partnered with. Now we've opened it up because we've seen so much success. We've opened it up to all teams, any players, anybody who wants to get better. And the number one thing that we've seen is when you start younger, we have a longer amount of time with you, and we can slow cook or have a long-term perspective on your development. It's not just, again, instant, in the one session, one lesson, one season. And so our youth development program is where we onboard all of the athletes into our coaches, our systems, our exercises, our drills. They're just all dumbed down to meet the needs of a 10 to 14-year-old. And so, that program, I think, with this group, it was almost exclusively just S&C, and then it was started off very separate. Like we would talk about mechanics, we would talk about changes, and then we started seeing, okay, we gotta integrate. And now with our youth development program currently, like the level of integration is much higher. To where it is a much better investment in your time and energy and money to get into our systems when they're young, get them used to coming to the facility and loving coming here, so that when times get rough and baseball gets hard, they're ready to put the work in and really get after it. And I'm again, I know we look forward to the next 6-year review. I want to do the next 2-year review. The kids started in our youth development program, and then boom, where do they at once they get to high school, college, whatever that may be. And this is going to be a continuous process for us.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you guys very much for listening and watching on YouTube. This has been Talking Points with KPI, episode number 36. If you would like to go look and read it for yourself, see the pictures. Picture obviously was posted in the podcast. Go look at it at kpimh.com. It's the most recent one that Justin and Eric have written together. And go look at it. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go follow us on all our social medias. See you guys next time. Sweet.